From our perspective, looks at the lives and behaviors of millennials, Generation Z, and the changes that are happening in our 21st century and the innovators that are making it happen. We will explore trends, technology, music, fashion, social media, business, science, the arts, faith, and lifestyle. So come join us on Comcast, Verizon, and online.
Miss Mary, an elderly black woman, sits anxiously, helpless, as she hears the screams of her neighbor, ELANA, across the hall. The screams eventually stop. Miss Mary waits a moment and then peeks through the door of her apartment. She is just in time to see David, ELANA's boyfriend, leaving. She hurries across the hall and knocks. There is no answer. She tries the doorknob. David carelessly left the door unlocked. Shortly after entering, she looks for ELANA. She knocks on the bedroom door.
ELANA? ELANA? Are you in there? ELANA?
Miss Mary opens the door to see ELANA. Her bruised arm flops on the ground as an almost empty bottle of pills rolls out of her hand under the bed. she barely sees Miss Mary as her eye, the one that isn't already black, slowly closes.
Oh my goodness!
Miss Mary calls 911. A nurse enters the waiting room and approaches Miss Mary. She readies herself for the worst.
Miss Mary, you may see Elena now.
The nurse takes the old woman by the hands and leads her to Elena's room.
She's still unconscious, but medication was given to counteract the effects of the drugs she took. She'll be just fine.
In the light of day, Elena's bruises and scars are made known. Miss Mary strokes her hair and holds her hand with all the love of a mother's touch.
Elena, I don't know if you can hear me, sweetheart. I can't do this anymore. You can't keep pretending nothing's wrong, and I can't keep pretending I don't know. But I'll save that for when you wake up.
The camera zooms into Elena's eyes. She looks troubled and disturbed. Suddenly she wakes up. After crying a bit because of the trauma, she notices a card sitting on the table. She walks over to it and reads. Suddenly, Grace, a 7-year-old girl with cancer, comes into the room.
Hi, my name is Grace. Do you have cancer too?
Elena looks at her, puzzled.
It's okay. My mommy says God knows it hurts, and she said he will take our pain away if we let him. Come on, I'll show you.
Grace reaches out to hold her hand. Elena reluctantly looks at her hand, smiles, then takes Grace's hand. Grace then leads Elena to the wellness room and shows her a prayer board.
See? This is the prayer I wrote for you.
Elena looks at the prayer and smiles. Then Grace and Elena go sit down at a table. Grace starts to draw. Elena notices the gospel written on a board behind her and gets closer to read it. She begins to cry as flashbacks of her boyfriend beating her flood her mind. She remembers how her parents neglected her and the familiar embrace of loneliness that drove her into David's arms. Elena cries for the girl before her, knowing her future and regretting her own past. Grace notices Elena's distress and tries to comfort her. Then, she writes on the board that God loves Elena. Elena wipes her tears and smiles at the kind gesture. Just then, the nurse enters.
Grace, sweetie, I was looking all over for you. Come on, you need to go back to your room.
Aw, okay.
Grace goes out into the hallway.
I take it she wasn't really bothering you? You know, she's going home today. That sweet little girl is cancer-free. Her doctor's just about to give her and her parents the news.
Grace and the nurse walk Elena back to her room and then exit. Elena smiles and looks out the window, where a small bird flies away from its nest in the trees.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to From Our Perspective. We just did a run of a clip, which is going to be our new anime. And we had the three characters, Miss Mary, Elena, and the nurse. And we're going to talk about those characters in more detail. And we're going to start with the question of abuse. You know, this is a very touchy subject. You know, I being the character of Miss Mary, who is an older woman who came in and saw Elena in distress, her boyfriend beating her. You know, these are things that we see and we hear about every day. What do you think as your character, both you, the nurse, Lita, who played the nurse, and Anaya, who played the young cancer victim, and of course our narrator here is Anthony. What are your feelings about abuse, and why do you think Elena, our character, and so many other young ladies stay in such a situation for such a long time?
Well, with Elena, I believe she stayed with her abusive boyfriend for so long because with a lot of abuse victims, they stay with the person that's abusing them because it's a way to seek some type of validation, and they may feel lacking in some area of their life, some emptiness that the abuse that the person is giving to them sort of fills that void. And I believe with Elena that her boyfriend, in some way, there is that void filled, with her boyfriend, and maybe he made her feel beautiful. That's the way it is with many abuse victims. They feel some type of a person that's abusing them, fills the void. So yeah.
That's an interesting intake, and I've heard that before from abused individuals, and then they feel sort of like they can't get out of the situation and they've gotten accustomed to it. But I'm going to ask Anthony, who's our narrator in this anime, from a male perspective. We say that it's usually the men that abuse, but there are women who abuse men on both sides. But what do you feel from a man's perspective as to why do you think men tend to be abusive?
Well, I would say that a lot of times security comes into it on both sides, but particularly from a male perspective, there's the security of the relationship. Oftentimes, in the same way a woman gets validation from a man gets a certain kind of validation from that he receives from being with this woman. And if the relationship that he has with her feels threatened, depending on the type of man we're dealing with here, that can result in abuse. It can result in insecurity on his part, and self-doubt. And if the man in question doesn't know how to deal with those feelings, and isn't, well, a term my father likes to use, if he has no root in himself, then he can only do damage to the world outside him.
It's a sort of a control mechanism.
Yes.
And we'll ask Anaya if you have an opinion on this.
Well, I definitely agree with what's already been said. I can't really add too much. It's just people that are. Are we talking still talking from the perspective of the male person?
Or even from the female perspective? Why do you think sometimes? Because sometimes, as it said, females also abuse. You know what I'm saying? Or, an abuse is not always just beating. Abuse could be, that controlling mechanism of, you can't go anywhere without me, or, I have to have all your, where you are at all times. That also too, or mentally just criticizing. A lot of times women abuse that way as well. They criticize the individual, I can do it better than you, or you're no good, or you never do things properly. Those negative comments as well can be.
I guess I'll just say that it just really does come from a place of insecurity. Like the abuse just definitely is coming from a place of insecurity. If that person were secure, they would not be picking apart the other person, but they're picking apart the other person because they're not sure of themselves, and so they don't know how to control that. And so picking apart the other person is a way to make it be for them to have some kind of control, as what's been said already.
Give them that sense of feel better of themselves, or make themselves feel more important, I think. That's awesome. Great insight. David had to be someone who was angry to beat up on Elena. You know, what do you think, you know, builds that up? You know, sometimes it's home situations. It could be situations of his own frustration about life and where he is in life. Or it could be drug related. If individuals have some sort of addiction. How do you all feel about that, Anthony, in reference to, you know, displaced anger? I think that's the best way to deal with it, displaced anger.
I would say that anger in any form, it's like the one emotion that doesn't really do anything for you. And releasing it, you have to be very careful about where and when you release it. But at the same time, you don't want to keep it bottled up. Otherwise, it does come out, and when it does, it's usually at an inopportune time. But oftentimes it can seem like it's gone, but the underlying issue is still there.
Yeah.
And we find it's just dormant.
Yeah.
You know. And when the issue comes back up, it
can explode.
Right.
And you know, I'm wondering about that now because it's so sad that we know about this shooting now in schools, and you know, this was the last shooting that we had was this young lady who came and shot the students in the school, and there's definitely anger that was involved in that. You know, as to you know, anyone who comes back to the workplace and they, you know. We're not dealing with the mental issue part of all of it, but we're just dealing with the anger part of it. They were upset with somebody. And I think sometimes, just in the general aspect, ourselves, we can get angry and we don't say anything. And then we let it build up. And then the person comes and do it again and we don't say anything. And then they come and do it again. And it's like, then you explode, you know? And the safest thing is that you just explode. But sometimes it can be to the point of what David did to Elena. You know, you just beat her up, and to the point of where, you know, if a gun was involved, or if some other detrimental instrument, like, you know, a knife or anything like that. And this goes on, you know. Any thoughts on that, ladies? Any thoughts?
I just think it's really unfortunate that that people, well, in this case, because this is an anime that's kind of representing real life.
Yes, exactly.
So, you know, I just think it's unfortunate that we're in a place where we can't talk to each other and, like, you know, work things out. You know, it sounds all like warm and fuzzy, like, oh, well, let's just get along and everything. But really, like, if people learn to communicate with each other, just like, it might be a little scary, and that the fact that it's a little scary might be the reason why they don't talk it out.
Yeah.
It might be scary, but if we just each take on a little bit of boldness, you know, and just, you know, ask God to help us, you know, and just say, okay, God, how can I talk to this person? Then we would be in a better place to communicate with other people, and then we wouldn't have everything inside, and we wouldn't blow up like in the case of that shooting. So, you know.
Yeah. Miss Mary, my character, found Elena in that situation. You know, she comes, her eyes are black and blue, and she has her pills falling out of her hand. So she's trying to basically end her life because of the pain that she's dealing with, this situation with the boyfriend. And from my character standpoint, you know, this is not the first time this has happened, because she comes in as a motherly figure saying, you know, Elena, this can't continue. Because she hears the screams, she hears the shouts. What are your thoughts on that in reference to, you know, Elena reaching to that stage where she feels so hopeless that she could have gone to Miss Mary, because Miss Mary seems to be a very nice person, if I should say so myself. You know, she seems like a very nice person. You know, she could have gone to her and say, you know, I need help. But I don't know if it's shame or what, but then she uses that alternative of taking pills. What do you think on that? Yeah,
well, in Elena's case, it seems like this was happening repetitively, which it was said in the story. So I think that Elena didn't go to Miss Mary because even when help is right in front of you, sometimes it seems like in her case it was hard for her to ask. It was hard for her to explain what the pain that she was feeling, and that can be the case with depression. Like it's in your head, and for Elena, she's just living with her boyfriend, and maybe it's this guilt that comes into play. She doesn't want to tell on David, and she doesn't know what to do. She doesn't see escape for herself, so that's where she turns to the pills.
Right. And suicide is becoming a real big problem in our society. And now, as you'll see coming across the screen, there is a 988 number, which is suicide. If you at any point in time feel like harming yourself or even harming others, you can definitely call 988, and there's individuals there to help 24/7. And now we're going to talk about worth, self-worth, there's on the screen in the background, we see on a napkin, it's written, when you know your worth, no one can make you feel worthless. And that's such a powerful, if you know your worth, worth in so many ways. We talk about worth in the sense of monies and what you have and who you are and education and all that stuff, and we know that. But worth is something more than that. Those are just material things. Worth is how you value yourself, how you see yourself through God's eyes. For those that are believers, how you were created. You have to have that sense of self-confidence, sense of, individuals shouldn't have to speak to me that way. And that's something that, we have to really be bold about, to stand for ourselves and having that, getting respect from individuals and being respectful to others. That's important as well, because if you want to be treated well, you should treat others well is important. So we're coming off of our characters right now, and we're going to talk about just self-worth. How do you define self-worth, Anthony?
Well, I think it's a recognition of your own unique, not just your talents, because those are what's valuable to the world, but the simple knowledge that you are valuable as a human being. Because once like it says on the napkin, once you can value yourself, other people can see the value in you. In addition to that, I think in Elena's case, she suffered from parental neglect. And if
we've been talking about that.
Yeah, and so if your parents are kind of they're the backbone of your self-worth in a lot of ways. And if what you're getting from them is that you're not valuable enough to even get any attention, right, it's gonna affect the way you interact with other people. When it has to do with, and I know there's like that there's a condition that they call it nice guy syndrome, when you seek attention that you either didn't get from your parents, or if you got the opposite kind of attention from your parents. They call it nice guy syndrome, and it happens to a lot of men. But in the case of women, they end up in abusive relationships.
So when you say nice guy syndrome, what do you mean, in the sense of what, they're nice guys?
Right, so...
Or they fake it?
Yeah, they more or less fake it because they're trying to fill a need that wasn't getting met earlier on in life.
And so they tend to be abusive?
Yeah, they do have the potential to be abusive, but more often than not, they are more susceptible to being abused, not physically per se, but in other ways, being manipulated.
Right, yeah, I get your point. Interesting. So, we're reflecting all this as we come to that point of understanding that abuse happens, anger happens, all these different things, suicide happens. But the underlying strength of what can make change in a person is, one, walking in forgiveness, but then also having the faith a faith in something that is, more powerful than we are, stronger than we are. And in this case, we talk about the Almighty God, as to realizing that we are, smaller individuals. We don't have all the answers. We don't have all the capabilities. So what does faith mean to each of you all individually, out of character, not as our characters in this anime, but just, individually? What does faith mean to you? And we will start with Lita.
Well, when I think of faith, I think immediately about God.
Yeah.
And that's trusting that whatever situation I'm going through or anyone's going through, that's trusting that you just go to God and you ask for Him to make a way in whatever it is that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And just believing and knowing that it also makes me feel a peace, because I know that whatever the situation is, God is going to make a way.
Yeah,
and
He got your back.
Yeah, He got
your
exactly.
back.
He has His hand over our lives,
Yeah.
and just resting in His hand, just laying back and resting. That's faith for me.
And that's a beautiful way of looking at it. Beautiful, Anaya.
Yeah, I want to second what Lita had said about the resting. Because the world is just so crazy, and in the sense of abuse and things like that, things happen, and it's like we don't have all the answers. We're just humans. We're finite creatures.
Yeah.
We are finite creatures. And we have our limitations. And to me, faith is that access to the infinite, or the access to the supernatural, to what is beyond myself.
The omnipotent, all powerful.
Exactly.
Right.
And without that, I'm resting in my own strength, and I cannot do that. So to me, faith is being able to have access to the Almighty God and believing that He will take care of everything, as Lita had said, and just being able to rest in that. Yeah,
that's awesome. Anthony?
Well, I would say that faith in my case is the establishment and retention of my identity, and my identity comes directly from God, since He is my creator, and the very evidence that I have towards my being not just a creation, but a creator in my own right, is one of the first things He told people to do was be fruitful, multiply, create things.
Right.
So
dominate.
Yeah. Right. So he
Right.
he created things, just like plants, animals, things like that.
Yeah.
And then He created creators.
Yeah,
And that says
that's awesome. That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
So and that makes it easier for me to look at myself as like the top tier of His creation. And so there's so part of my identity is in Him.